Edward Geoffrey Irving ARDIZZONE was born in 1900 in the city of Haiphong in the north of French Indochina, now Vietnam, where his father Auguste ARDIZZONE was working for a telephone company. His father was a naturalised Frenchman of Italian descent, and his mother Margaret was English. In 1905 she returned to England with her three eldest children and left them in the care of their grandmother in Ipswich and the county of Suffolk, before returning to the Far East to join her husband. Edward's enthusiasm for drawing was encouraged by his art teacher at boarding school, but when he left school at 18 he spent the next few years working as an office clerk, while simultaneously taking evening drawing classes at the Westminster School of Art. In 1927 his father reluctantly but generously offered him some financial support so he could give up his tedious job and try to get established as an artist and illustrator. And a year later he was given his first commission to create monochrome illustrations for an edition of J. Sheridan Faneu's short stories In a Glass Darkly. It was also in 1929 that ARDIZZONE married Catherine Anderson, and the couple went on to have two sons and a daughter. By this point he had gained enough of a reputation as an artist to have a one-man exhibition of his paintings and lithographs, and among them in 1931 he produced a collection of colour lithographs on the theme of the British pub. I've never read anything to support my assertion, but I can't be the only person to have noticed a striking similarity between ARDIZZONE's painted and lithographic art and that of the French 19th century artist and illustrator Honoré Daumier. And it seems both men evinced considerable empathy for the rest of humanity in their work too. Significantly, in 1936 he published the first in what will be a massively popular and enduring series of books about the young boy Tim and his seagoing adventures. He both wrote and illustrated Little Tim and the Brave Sea Captain, and it was published simultaneously in London and New York. These images were created as virtually all his colour work would be, with light, seemingly casual pen and ink line work, with similarly gesture overlays of bright watercolour washes. And although far from what could be called realistic, they captured human anatomy and posing with considerable flair. The book also featured what will become a trademark ARDIZZONE device, with the occasional incorporation of wispy speech balloons containing brief but relevant dialogue. From this point on, ARDIZZONE became remarkably prolific as an illustrator, and in 1938 he followed the success of the first Tim book with Tim and Lucy Go to Sea, which enjoyed similar success. The inclusion of more young characters, including Lucy and the appropriately named Ginger, gave ARDIZZONE greater scope for his narrative skills, and the potential of the series was increased accordingly. Other commissions also came his way from magazines, including the Radio Times, and there was occasional advertising work, including this poster for Shell Oil in 1938. But it was book illustration which was dominant in his output, and in the same year he published an illustrated edition of Great Expectations by Charles Dickens for the Heritage Press. And although aimed at an adult audience, he used precisely the same evocations of character and combination of ink, graphite and watercolour as he had for his children's work. In 1939 his earlier pub lithographs were published in book form with the title The Local, and his friend the writer Maurice Gorham provided text to accompany these endearing but unsentimental scenes. But that was the year in which Britain went to war with Germany, and although already 39 years old, ARDIZZONE initially served in an anti-aircraft unit, but was soon posted overseas as an official war artist. He was with the British Expeditionary Force and depicted their retreat from the German forces through France and Belgium before being evacuated back to Britain in 1940. There he recorded troops in military training and civilian life during the Blitz, with considerable empathy for his compatriots. In 1942 he joined the army on its way to Tunisia, and following his time there he continued to travel widely through various European and North African countries. And by the time the war ended in 1945, he had completed almost 400 sketches and watercolours of the conflict, most of which are now held at the Imperial War Museum. After the war, ARDIZZONE resumed his freelance career and received commissions for covers from the Strand magazine and the Radio Times, as well as occasional forays into other areas such as this poster, promoting a 1947 film of Charles Dickens' Nicholas Nickleby. In 1948 he returned to book illustration for the C. Day Lewis children's novel The Otterbury Incident, with a collection of dark inky monochromes which perfectly captured all aspects of this narrative, with some animated heavily populated scenes. And it was also in 1948 that he published Paul, the Hero of the Fire, with some expertly evoked crowded line and wash compositions about the boy who saves the day from impending disaster. In 1949 he illustrated an edition of The Tale of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves for the Limited Editions Club. 2,500 copies were published, featuring colour illustrations which ranged from close-quarter character-based compositions through to more complex single and double-page spreads, all of which demonstrated his enviable ability to bring to visual life such narrative fantasies for his readers. There followed a run of 3 more Tim books in fairly rapid succession. Tim to the Rescue was published in 1949, and the story of Tim and Charlotte followed in 1951. Tim in Danger appeared in 1953, and all 3 stories demonstrated the apparently infinite potential of this series, which was enthusiastically consumed by British youngsters of the time. The Fantastic Tale of the Plucky Sailor and the Postage Stamp by Stephen Corrin was published in 1954, and the story was greatly enhanced by ARDIZZONE's visual contribution, making another pitch-perfect harmonious blend of text and image. In the middle of the 1950s he added the humour magazine Punch to his growing list of clients, and in 1955 he illustrated a promotional book of comic verse for Guinness about indoor sports and games. Of course, this was just a sophisticated marketing ploy by the brewer's advertising agency, but that didn't detract from the sheer entertainment value and visual appeal of ARDIZZONE's cheerful images. The agency also commissioned him to create this poster for their wildly successful campaign of the time, and this now highly prized limited edition lithograph promoting the inauguration of the Guinness Book of Records. Despite this increase in his more overtly commercial activity, he also memorably illustrated The Little Book Room by Eleanor Farjan, with a collection of typically engaging pen and ink monochromes, and as with quite a few other authors, ARDIZZONE became her illustrator of choice for later published work. In 1956 he published Tim All Alone, which proved to be one of the most successful in this by now ever expanding series. This was a particularly moving story in which the boy sets off to find his parents, who have mysteriously gone missing. On the eve occasions of loneliness, some of which were monochrome and others which were enhanced with washes of colour, could not have been more emotionally charged and genuinely moving. In the same year he illustrated another for the Heritage Press, this time an edition of Thackeray's 1852 novel The History of Henry Esmond, Esquire, with single-colour overlays, also published as a signed and numbered limited edition for serious collectors. 1957's Prefabulous Animals by James Reeves, another of ARDIZZONE's frequent collaborators, gave him the perfect opportunity to use his powerful imagination and sense of the absurd in the creation of a collection of highly amusing and occasionally grotesque fantasy animals. But in 1958 he returned again to the Heritage Press for an illustrated collection of Shakespeare's comedies, for which he produced engrossing and generally light-hearted moments with his expected loose hatching and application of unusual but impressive limited colour combinations. He continued to make occasional appearances on the cover of Punch at this time, and there were other continuing forays into other areas, including publicity for the publisher's Bodley Head. In the following year his visualisation of the story of Don Quixote, retold by James Reeves, was also published. And although the images were exclusively monochrome with the notable exception of the cover, this was far from detrimental to their narrative success, even if the use of colour could have greatly enhanced the bright Spanish light and terrain. Among the writers with whom ARDIZZONE had enduring associations was the American Eleanor Estes, and among others they worked successfully on 1960's The Witch Family, published on both sides of the Atlantic. In 1962 he illustrated the story of Peter Pan, originally written as a play by J.M. Barrie, and in this instance rewritten as a novel for children by Eleanor Graham. And in addition to a large number of monochrome vignettes used as spot illustrations, there was also a collection of sequences from this enduring classic fantasy adventure, rendered in line and wash, which successfully brought the story to life for a new generation of young readers. The mix of outlandish settings, characters and more intimate emotional moments provided by the narrative was a perfect fit for ARDIZZONE's evocative technique. The following year saw the publication of another adventure tale, The Land of Green Ginger, originally written and illustrated by Noel Langley in 1937. The images created were monochrome only, and although engaging and amusing enough, it seems a pity he wasn't able to bring the same colourful qualities to this Middle Eastern fantasy as he had with the earlier Ali Baba. In the same year, another book, Stig of the Dump by Clive King, was also published. This tale of a young boy who befriends another who he discovers living in a cave featured many monochromes, and the book has since proven to be yet another remarkably enduring popular success. 1964 saw the publication of another real highlight with his own story, Diana and the Rhinoceros. This engaging, gleefully absurdist and genuinely emotionally moving story really brought out the best from him as author and illustrator. The whimsical juxtaposition of the English middle classes of suburbia with the presence of this huge but docile beast and the charmingly sedate but humorous illustrations made this book, which is still in print 60 years later, a comedic delight for young children and the child that still resides inside those of us whose youth is considerably more distant. The first Nurse Matilda book in a series written by his cousin Christiana Brand was published in 1964, and another two were published a few years later. They were much later rewritten as the basis of a live-action film in 2005, with Matilda being renamed Nanny McPhee. The Dragon, written by Archibald Marshall, was published in 1966, and this comedic medieval fantasy gave ARDIZZONE the perfect opportunity to augment the humour of the text. As was the usual preference of his publishers, and presumably ARDIZZONE himself, some were rendered in pen and ink only, and others were augmented with colour washes. This was another triumphant demonstration of his unerring ability to sympathetically enhance the written work of others to their considerable benefit. The same year saw the publication of another two books. Anne at Highwood Hall was a collection of poems for children by Robert Graves, for which he produced a series of evocative pen drawings with added pale green and pink colour overlays. And the other was a collaboration with his daughter-in-law, Angelda, titled The Little Girl and the Tiny Doll, for which he produced endearing monochromes executed with a particularly effective light touch of great sensitivity. In 1972 he published the last of the Tim series with Tim's Last Voyage, making for a total of 10 published over 4 decades. And to the best of my knowledge they are all still in print and available from online booksellers. Early in the 1970s, ARDIZZONE also illustrated a quartet of books written for children by Graham Greene 20 years earlier. The Little Train, The Little Fire Engine, The Little Horse Bus and The Little Steamroller all had central transportation-themed characters, but were not in any way anthropomorphic. Each story unfolded with the clear emphasis being placed on the human characters who interacted with these vehicles in one way or another. The series provided more evidence, if it was needed, that ARDIZZONE had no intention of retiring. In 1977, when he was 77 years old, he illustrated the book of verse Arcadian Ballads by his longtime collaborator James Reeves. And only a year later he created yet more for the James Reeves storybook. It was also in 1978 that his edition of Hans Andersen's fairy tales was published. The light touch he employed with both the inking and the application of colour on this collection was well suited to the charm of Andersen's narratives. and he switched effortlessly from humour and absurdity to more emotionally charged material with apparent ease. This book proved to be a fitting epitaph, and he died a year later of a heart attack at the age of 79 in Rodmersham Green in the county of Kent. As with others I've covered in the series, the work of Edward ARDIZZONE may well be an acquired taste for some viewers, but for those of us who admire him as an illustrator, his work is a continuing source of good-natured and expressive visual delight. Maybe I've made a few converts with this far from exhaustive review, and maybe not, but either way, here are some more pictures I couldn't squeeze into the narrative to bring this to a close.